If your last name is on this list, your ancestors didn't just live through the Norman Conquest, they were shaped by it, recorded by it, and in one case, they stood on the field at Hastings itself. On the 14th of October, 1066, 7,000 men crossed the English Channel and changed every English-speaking family that would ever exist. 20 years later, their king ordered a survey so complete that the English called it the Domesday Book, the Book of Judgment, because, like the Last Judgment, there was no appeal from what was written in it. These 10 surnames appear in the records that Conquest created. The Domesday Book of 1086, the Chronicles, the feudal rolls, and most families who carry them today have no idea what they once meant. Stay until number 1, because that surname belongs to a list so short, so strict, that historians accept only about 15 names on it, and if you carry it, you may be carrying the closest thing to documented proof of 1066 that any family can have. Number 10, Smith. The most common surname in England, in America, across the entire English-speaking world. And here is the strange thing. Smith is not a Norman name at all. It comes from the Old English smith, the worker in metal, the man who made the tools, the horseshoes and the blades. It is Anglo-Saxon to its core, the most essential trade in any village. So why does it open a list about the Norman Conquest? Because of what the conquest did to it. Before 1066, almost no English family had a fixed, hereditary surname. A man was Smith because he worked the forge. His son might be called something else entirely. It was the Norman machinery of record-keeping, the tax rolls, the manor courts, the doomsday habit of writing everything down that slowly nailed names to families. Roughly between 1100 and 1400. The most Saxon name in England was locked into place by a Norman-shaped world. If your name is Smith, your ancestor stood at the anvil of a conquered country, and it was the conqueror's clerks who made sure his name would outlive him. The next name sounds just as English. It isn't. Number 9, Taylor. Taylor feels about as English as a name can be. It is the 4th most common surname in the United Kingdom. And it is French. It comes from the Old French tailleur, a cutter of cloth, and it arrived in England with the Norman world after 1066. There is a fault line buried inside English trade names, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The Anglo-Saxon word for a metalworker gave us smith, but the man who cut fine cloth was named in the conqueror's language. Because for 2 centuries after Hastings, French was the language of the manor house, the court, and the customer who could afford a tailor. Now, one honest caution: carrying the name Taylor does not necessarily mean Norman blood. English speakers borrowed these French trade words too, and plenty of Saxon-descended tailors ended up with a French name for a French-sounding trade. But the name itself is a Norman import, a quiet piece of 1066 sitting inside one of the most ordinary surnames in the language. If your name is Taylor, your ancestor worked a trade fashionable enough to be named in French, the language of the men who won at Hastings. The next name hides 3 invasions inside 3 syllables. Number 8, Robinson. Robinson means son of Robin, and Robin is a pet form of Robert. Simple enough, until you notice where each piece came from. The son ending is a patronymic habit that piles up thickest in the north and east of England. Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, the old Danelaw. The territory the Viking armies carved out in the 9th century. That dense son of naming custom is Scandinavian. But Robert is a Norman name. It crossed the Channel in 1066 with men like Robert de Beaumont and Robert Count of Mortain, the conqueror's own half-brother. Within a couple of generations, Norman, first names like Robert and William, had flooded England and shoved the old Saxon and Norse first names almost completely aside. So Robinson is a true palimpsest, a Viking naming habit wrapped around a Norman first name, written down in the English language. 3 waves of settlers stacked inside one ordinary surname. If your name is Robinson, your family line sat where the Norse North met the Norman New Order, and the name records the exact moment the conqueror's names won. The next name built the castles that held England down. Number 7. Mason. Mason comes from the Old French maçon, a worker in stone. Like tailor, it is a trade named in the Conqueror's tongue. But with Mason, the connection to 1066 is not just linguistic, it is physical. You can still touch it. Before the conquest, England was a country of timber halls and wooden churches. The Normans changed that with terrifying speed. Within 20 years of Hastings Castle mounds had risen over almost every important town in England. And then came the stone, the White Tower in London, begun under William the Conqueror himself, and a wave of cathedrals at Durham, Winchester, and beyond that still dominate their cities 1,000 years later. Someone had to cut all that stone. The men who did Norman master masons and the English laborers who learned under them worked the single largest building program England had seen since the Romans left. If your name is Mason, your ancestor may have carried the trade that turned a conquered country into a fortress, one squared block at a time. The next name isn't a trade at all, it's an address written into the Book of Judgment. Number 6. Sutton. Sutton is Old English, and its meaning is almost comically plain. The South Tun, the southern farmstead. It is one of the most common place names in all of England. There are dozens of Suttons scattered across the map. So, where is the Norman Conquest in a Saxon farm name? In the book that recorded it. Open the Domesday Book of 1086 and Sutton appears again and again. County after county Saxon settlements, counted and valued by Norman commissioners, each entry noting who held the land in 1066 under King Edward and who held it now. In thousands of entries, the answer to that second question was a new French name. Habitational surnames like Sutton usually mark the family that left a man was called de Sutton, of Sutton, when he moved away and needed to say where he came from. The name is a luggage tag from Anglo-Saxon England, checked and stamped by Norman clerks. If your name is Sutton, or Preston, or Middleton, or any of their cousins, your ancestor was known by a piece of Saxon ground that the Domesday Book weighed taxed, and very often handed to a conqueror. The next name belonged to a family that would one day make and unmake kings. Number 5. Neville. Neville is Norman geography, plain and simple. It comes from Neuville, the new town, and the family took its name from their fief in Normandy. When the name crossed the Channel after 1066, it entered England near the top of society and never really came down. But here is the twist genealogists love. The mighty Neville line of the north of England is not in the male line Norman at all. In the late 12th century, Robert Fitzmordred, a man descended from the native English lords of the north, married the Neville heiress, and their son took his mother's prestigious Norman surname. The most famous Norman family of northern England carried Saxon line blood under a French name, and famous they became. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, held such power during the Wars of the Roses that history remembers him as the Kingmaker, the man who put Edward IV on the throne, then tore him off it again, before falling in battle at Barnet in 1471. If your name is Neville, your name walked into England with the conquerors, even if, as the Nevilles themselves prove, the blood underneath a Norman name can be older than the conquest itself. The next name you've met it in a novel. Its real story is in the Domesday Book. Number 4. Darcy. Say Darcy, and most people picture a brooding gentleman in a Jane Austen drawing room, Mr. Darcy, of Pride and Prejudice. But Austen chose that name deliberately, because to her readers, Darcy smelled of ancient Norman money. Darcy began as Darcy of Arcy, from the barony of Arcy in Normandy. That little French de, meaning from, survives fossilized inside the name. You can still hear it every time the name is spoken. Tradition holds that a Norman knight of this family came over with the conquest and was granted some 30 manors in Lincolnshire, and the family appears in the Domesday Book of 1086 in the Latin-flavored form de Arcis. From those Lincolnshire lands, the Darcy spread, including centuries later, deep into Ireland, where Darcy became one of the famed tribes of Galway. If your name is Darcy, or Percy, or any name that still carries that hidden French de, Your surname is a preserved fragment of Norman French, an of pointing back across the channel to a village your family left 9.5 centuries ago. The next name means something dark, and its family nearly swallowed the English crown. Number 3. Mortimer. Mortimer comes from Mortimer in Normandy, and the name is usually read as Dead Sea, Mortmer, a stagnant lake near the village. A dark name, and the family history lives up to it. In 1054, at the Battle of Mortimer, a Norman force crushed an invading French army, and one of the Norman leaders was Roger de Mortimer, the first man of the line. Then he made a catastrophic mistake. Among the prisoners was his own feudal lord, and Roger let him go. Duke William, the future conqueror, was furious and stripped Roger of his lands. They later reconciled, and he got almost everything back except Mortimer itself. The family kept the name of a place they had already lost. After the conquest, Ralph de Mortimer held vast lands along the Welsh border from Wigmore Castle, and his descendants, the Earls of March, clawed their way toward the throne itself. In 1327, Roger Mortimer, lover of Queen Isabella, deposed King Edward II and ruled England in all but name until the young Edward III seized him at Nottingham Castle and had him hanged. If your name is Mortimer, your surname remembers a drowned-looking lake in Normandy and a family that rose from losing that village to very nearly taking a kingdom. 2 names left. Both were at Hastings. One of them can prove it better than almost any name alive. Number 2. Beaumont. Beaumont is pure Norman French, and it means exactly what it sounds like. Beaumont, the beautiful hill. It is a locative name from Normandy, and, unlike most names on this list, it connects to the 14th of October, 1066, directly. Robert de Beaumont fought at Hastings. This is not family legend. The contemporary chronicler William of Poitiers records him there. A young man commanding on the Norman right wing in his first battle, and doing it well. He was rewarded with English lands and died one of the most powerful magnates in the Anglo-Norman world. Earl of Leicester. And there is a deeper layer. Tradition traces the Beaumont line back to the Scandinavian rulers of Normandy, because the Normans were not really French at all. The word Norman literally means Northman. They were the descendants of Viking raiders who had seized the mouth of the Seine a century and a half earlier, trading their longships for horses and their Norse for French. When a Beaumont stepped ashore in 1066, the Viking layer was arriving in England for the second time, in chainmail instead of a longship. If your name is Beaumont, tradition and chronicle together put your surname on the winning side of the most consequential single day in English history. And now the name that tops this list, and the secret that comes with it. Number 1. Malet. You may never have met a Malet. The name is rare today, rarer than any other name on this list, and that rarity is exactly what makes what follows so remarkable. Malet is a Norman surname, born by the lords of Graville in Normandy, where their castle stood above the Seine estuary. And here is the secret, confirmed not by family legend, but by the strictest test historians have. Thousands of families have claimed for centuries that our ancestor came over with the Conqueror. Almost none can prove it. When scholars most famously, in Cocaine's Complete Peerage, sifted every reliable contemporary source for men who can actually be documented fighting beside Duke William at Hastings, the list collapsed to about 15 names. Historians call them the proven companions, not the thousands on the later Battle Abbey roll, which is riddled with families who paid or wished their way onto it. 15 men. William Malet is one of them. The chronicler William of Poitiers, writing within a decade of the battle, places him on the field. And one contemporary account adds an astonishing detail after the battle. It was Malet who was entrusted with the burial of the fallen English king, Harold himself. 20 years later, the Malet family's lands stretch across the pages of the Domesday Book, from East Anglia to Yorkshire. If your name is Malet or Malet or Malet, as it later softened, your surname sits on the shortest, hardest list in English medieval history. Your ancestry isn't a family story, It is a chronicle entry, written while the eyewitnesses still lived. 10 surnames, 10 threads leading back through the tax rolls and the chronicles, to a muddy hillside near Hastings, and a book the English called Judgment. One caution, and it matters. A surname suggests it does not prove. Names were borrowed, adopted, changed at a clerk's whim, taken from a landlord. A Norman lord's Saxon tenants might carry his French name with not a drop of his blood. The only real confirmation is a documented paper trail. Paired with the DNA, the name can only hint at. But your name isn't decoration, it's a record. Drop your surname in the comments and tell me, did you know? And come back next week, because we are only just getting started.